Executives up at night. According to Execs surveyed by Grant Thornton in South Africa, it's rising energy costs and the fluctuating rand. Those have now overtaken red tape and a lack of a skilled workforce as the country's biggest constraints. Well, it comes after it was revealed last week that Eskom's rate hike next year may be higher than the 8% it's already been granted. The regulator said it would allow Eskom to claw back some previous lost revenue, and the increase next April could go as high as 13%. Well, to discuss, we're now joined by the National Chair of Grant Thornton in South Africa. That's Deepak Nager, who is live from our studio in Durban. And welcome to you, Deepak. Can you give us the overall picture when it comes to what execs are fretting about? How does South Africa compare to the rest of the world, and how have things changed?
Thank you, Francis, and good evening to the listeners. And I think for the first time in 7 years, we actually have something new to talk about. We have more than 50% of the executives talking about the exchange rate fluctuations and obviously the energy issues as well from their perspective. And what's interesting is that the 8% increase we talked about last week, it probably wasn't even factored into our survey. So, and what's interesting is that compared to the African counterparts in our BRIC nations, as well as the rest of the world, funny enough, is these two issues are not prevalent. It's more with regard to the economy and how the economy is doing, and will they be able to continue and sustain the growth that they've had, and where the new growth is going to come from into the future as well.
So we're looking very different. Let's just bring up a graph. As you said, more than 50% of executives locally are worried about rising energy costs. Is this something that they really want government to deal with as a matter of urgency?
Absolutely. And I think the fundamental issue here is that these rising costs in the current economic state, they just can't pass them on to the end consumer. And from that perspective, it puts margins under pressure for companies that employ thousands of people, millions of people across the country. And when the margins are under pressure, when profitability is under pressure, then effectively sustainability of business comes under pressure, and simply employment then comes under pressure.
Talking about pressure, are you surprised at the impact that the rand is having? Because we know that sometimes it helps some companies, especially exporters like the miners, when it's weaker. But I guess most people would say it's the uncertainty, it's the volatility that's the problem.
Correct. That's exactly it, Francis. It's the uncertainty. And I don't think whether it's at 11 rand or 12 rand is the issue. It's just simply the fluctuations. And from a business perspective, it's very, very difficult to budget, very, very difficult to account for these fluctuations. And again, these are fluctuations that they can't necessarily pass on to the end consumers and recover costs as well.
So you spoke about this change. Previously, they were worried about red tape and the lack of skills. Are those moving down on the list of concerns because they're being addressed and execs are less worried about them? Or is it rather a matter of energy prices simply becoming more pressing and more important?
I think there's still concerns, the red tape issue and the skills development issue. But I think what's happened is that over the last 7 years, business has become a little more robust in dealing with these issues. And obviously, they're a lot more prevalent. So businesses have dealt with them over the last 7 years. And recently, obviously, energy costs have continued to rise. And I think it's just the impact over the last few years that energy costs has risen to a level that's now where businesses are actually saying, look, it's becoming unsustainable. We can't continue in this light. We need some sort of intervention with regard to these continuing rising energy costs.
And like you say, that was before we even heard that next year's hike could be bigger. Thank you so much for your time. That was Grant Thornton's Deepak Nager from our Durban studio.